The amazing digital circus has started popping up a bit in FNF, and while I don't think it'll be as big as the Pibby mods were in the FNF community, I do find some of the lore and the theories fascinating. In this video, I want to explain the backstory for the world and each character and some of the theories that have popped up thus far. Now, as of the making of this video, we only have the pilot episode and a few trailers to work with, but they surprisingly give us a ton of insight into this universe. Now, first and foremost, the episode begins with a character named Caine appearing on screen and letting us know that he is the ringleader of this actual world. And he tells the audience that he's going to show us some of his amazing paraphernalia, which is an interesting choice of word, because then we actually see all the main characters get introduced, which implies that they are the paraphernalia that he's actually talking about, which means that they are tools that are used for something, we just don't know yet. Now that could be tools for Caine's pleasure, although he doesn't strike me as evil, and I'll kind of talk about that as we see what he does in this episode. Or maybe these characters actually serve some other function, like keeping this world alive and functioning. Now, something interesting to note here is that there was supposed to be a clown in the intro, but for some reason he didn't show up today, which will become a very important point later. But more immediately, I think this is what gives the main character, Pomy, the opportunity to actually make her way into this world. Now, the first thing that I noticed about Pomy is that she is a harlequin, aka a jester, because that's the word that people are more familiar with. And while most people know these characters to be used as comic relief most of the time, they do have another function when you see them in literature or stories in general. Now, these type of characters are often introduced as like a lighthearted person who is pursuing some type of love interest, or, and more importantly, they're a character that functions as like a wrench in the plans of like a master or a king or some type of ruler in some shape or form. So in my mind, I think that Pomy appearing in this world is going to be the start of a great change or utter destruction of this universe. Now, with the introduction of Pomy, we are given a ton of information about this world as well. We learn that Pomy was in the real world with some type of VR headset before being sent here, which may mean that her consciousness has been saved and uploaded into this game. And I say game because later in the video, we actually will be directed to a website that confirms this. We also learn that there's no cussing in this world, which kind of implies that it's a game that is meant maybe for children, and there doesn't seem to be any type of exit, meaning that these characters cannot escape once they're here, or at least from what we know so far. And something that I missed the first time when watching this is that Kinger has been here the longest, and now that I've watched this a couple of times, I think that Kinger is going to have a much bigger role in his plot than originally a lot of people thought. Now next we see Caine takes Pomy outside to show her a bit of the world, which we learn is quite small unless you count the void. Now something I want to point out here is that when Caine is talking about the activities available to them, he freezes and gets a sound that is very similar to old dial-up internet. And while I know that most of you are probably too young to actually have experienced it, but I know that you probably understand the sound because it's been used a ton. Now, while this may seem like a small detail, it does give us an idea of the time period that this all takes place in. And since dial-up came out in 1992, I would guess that this takes place in the early 1990s. That would also explain the pretty basic graphics that we see in the background of this world as well. Another thing that I want to point out here is that we learn that Caine has eyes everywhere in this world and seems to be very powerful, but not even he has any control over the actual void. And funny enough, this lack of control over the void is what actually gave me my first inkling that this guy isn't actually evil. I think that he is simply an AI who is doing his best to keep the humans trapped here sane. And we'll see more of this in the next scene. Now on the way back, Pomy actually sees an exit door, but Caine dismisses it, simply saying that it is
no magical exit door. You're probably just experiencing digital hallucinations from your mind's transition to the digital plane.
I swear I saw it.
Digital hallucinations!
And after that, we see them moving on to getting Pomy her name because for whatever reason, she can't seem to remember what her name is, or at least her human name. And this is another reason why I think she's just like an aspect of a person's consciousness that has been transferred into the game world and not truly the person. It seems that Pomy was able to keep some of her core traits and mannerisms that she had as a human, but details like her name, which are not really important to the game world, are simply gone. And my thinking for that is kind of like when you play RPG, you don't actually use your real name sometimes, you'll just make up some whatever funny name you want. Or when you play like first person shooters, right? You will see crazy names on the internet, just straight up inappropriate names even. Another thing that I want to point out here is that we see another limitation to Caine's power when he says that he can't actually control their minds. So this lets us know right now that he is definitely not some type of god in this world, but he does have a lot of power. Now when Caine pulls out a little slot machine to choose a name for Pomy, the first name that pops up is a series of Roman numerals, which I believe reads out to be 1210. But after digging around the wiki a little bit, it seems that these numbers don't really have any meaning, but instead are like a inside joke with the animation crew. Now, the next name that pops up on the slot machine is Pomy, which has a few different meanings depending on the language that you are speaking. If you are Russian, Pomy means don't forget it or remember to do. If you are Polish, the word means mindful or like having something in consideration. And if you're Bulgarian, the word means remember. If you speak any of these languages, confirm down in the comments, and if you speak a different language that has this word in it, let us know what it actually means in your language. Next in the episode, we see that Caine is setting up a in-house adventure for Pomy so that she can learn the ropes of this place. And I also think it is to give the people in this place something to do to keep their minds busy. The adventure involves them catching these little things called gloinks. And this is where we actually see the party split, with Jax, Pomy, and Ragatha going to find the clown named Kaufmo, and Kinger and Gangle are sent to save Zoobles, who was taken by the Gloinks. Now, before we move on to this next scene, this is a good time to break down what we know about each of the side characters so far, starting with Jax. I find Jax interesting because he seems to be the most unbothered with the fact that they are trapped here. It almost feels like he's not a human originally, but he's like an AI pretending to be a human. And in the next scene, something else will happen to make me believe this even more. But my other theory is that he is just young. He's only 22, making him the youngest person in the group, and we know that he's been in this world for a while, meaning that maybe he was only 16 or 18 when he was originally trapped in the game, which would explain why he's kind of a jerk. No offense to my young people. Another theory that I have for Jax is that he could also be like a trickster type character in this world, because we all know that one of the main characters that end up being tricksters are rabbits, but along with like foxes, coyotes, even ravens. And whenever these characters are in stories, they are kind of portrayed the same way that Jack is portrayed. He seems to be very kind of witty, very cunning. He seems to also be unbothered by this, right? And he also seems to be a little bit of comic relief. The only issue that I have with this theory though is that he almost seems to be leaning more to the side of being mean as opposed to just being funny. And usually when you see trickster characters, they may try to get over on you, but it's always like in a comical way for the most part. Jax kind of feels like he has a real like mean streak about him.
They broke my comedy mask.
So, Caine, we having a new adventure today for the newbie or what?
Now, the next character that I want to talk about is the second youngest, and that's going to be Zoobles, who is actually 22, but she's 6 months older than Jax. And while we don't know much about her yet, we know that she has spent the least amount of time in this world except for Pomy, who obviously just arrived. And something that I found interesting about her is that she's the only other character thus far besides Pomy who tries to cuss, and she also seems to be content with being in this space, almost as if she's given up on trying to escape. Next, we have the character named Gangle, who is actually 26 years old, which surprised me. I thought this character was more of like a child, especially since when Jack steps on her mask, breaking even more, all she does is cry. I'm curious to see if this is because of her actual personality or if it's just because that was her happy mask, so now she can only be sad. Something else that I found interesting is that apparently her design is based off that little image of like the happy mask and the sad mask. I can't remember what they're actually called, but if I show you this picture here, I'm sure most of you will probably know what I'm talking about. Next, we have Ragatha, who's actually 30 years old, and her character seems to be based off the old school Raggedy Ann dolls. And besides Kinger, she's been trapped in this world the longest. And the last person on here is going to be Kinger, of course, and he's 48 years old, and according to Jax, Kinger's been trapped in this world the longest, which is why he seems to be going a bit crazy. And they kind of show that by showing how fidgety he is just with his body language and the fact that he's nearly 50 years old and he's building pillow forts. But I think in this next scene, it's going to kind of explain to us why he hasn't lost his mind completely. Now, in the next scene, we're in this weird hallway that seems to have the faces of characters that are currently in this world and characters that were here at one point or another. And we see that some of these characters have X's over their faces. A few of the characters I were able to make out was the dog here, this anteater looking thing. There's also a few pictures in the very back of the hallway that are kind of hard to make out. But the one that really stood out for me is this image here of this queen, which I assume to be like Kinger's wife or his partner in some which way or form. And I believe that this may be part of the reason that he hasn't gone completely insane in this world yet. Maybe he still has some type of hope that he can get his wife back, even though it seems that she's also been X'd out like some of these other characters who we obviously don't see walking around in this world. And Rag actually gives us some good insight into why people may have these X's on their door.
Still don't understand. About the adventures? Why even go on them at all? Why not try to find a way to leave?
Well, we usually do when we first arrive, but after a while you start to realize that you really can't leave, and constantly chasing an unattainable goal will start driving you a bit crazy. And eventually you get to asking what the point of anything is, and you completely lose sight of who you are and why you're even alive, and when you reach your breaking point, something really terrible can happen.
Based off what Rag is telling us, it seems that once a person loses hope, something terrible happens to them where they basically like lose who they are. And we all know what this kind of alludes to like in the real world. I don't think I can say the word on YouTube anymore without being demonetized. But people who got this X basically took themselves out. And we see what that actually looks like when Jax opens the doors to Kaufmo's room, which is another interesting fact here as well. Why would Jax have access to everyone's room as he said, and also knows what their fears are? It gives off the vibe that he is definitely a bigger player in this world than he's pretending to be, but not so big to where he can go toe to toe with this abstraction, which is what people are called when they actually lose hope. Which is an interesting name because to be abstract means that it doesn't have a solid sense of identity any longer, which perfectly represents these characters losing their humanity. But instead of simply going insane, they turn into this black blob monster. Something else that we learn about this world as this creature attacks Rag is that these characters can be damaged, and if they are, they will begin to glitch. And what makes matters worse is that the glitch can spread to other characters that they touch. And this seems to be the only thing in this world that people really have to worry about thus far, because as Rag tells us earlier, people don't really need to rest or sleep or eat even. They simply do these things so they can keep parts of their humanity, but it's not necessary. Now in the next scene, we see Jax meets back up with Kinger and Gangle and forces them down into the Gloink Queen's nest, where we are introduced to the Queen of the Gloinks. And while she seems to think very highly of herself, I noticed that the characters don't really seem to have a whole lot of respect for her. Something else that stood out in this scene is that even though Zubul is eaten by the Queen, Jax still doesn't really seem concerned, giving the impression that he really only cares about himself and his own safety. And the only time in this episode where I really see him start to look worried is when this Gloink here actually starts to glitch out, showing that at the very least, he understands how dangerous the glitch can be for them. Now above ground, we see that Pomy is still avoiding the abstraction while trying to find Caine so that she can actually save Rag. There's a scene here that seems to be really important where Pomy actually sees herself for the first time in this mirror. I don't know if this is so profound because she finally realizes that this is all real and that this is her new body, or if there's some meaning here that will make more sense as more episodes are released. With that being said, she doesn't take too much time to look at herself because this huge abstraction is still chasing her, so she has to keep moving. And this is where we actually see that she finds a exit door that takes her to what looks like a office space, which I believe may be the office in which the video game world was developed. And while Pomy is running through this space, we are met with a scene that shows the abstraction falling from the upper floor onto the back of the Gloink Queen, where it quickly starts to max her out. Which kind of surprised me because the Gloink Queen is huge. I thought she'd be able to go toe to toe with this beast, but not at all. And I suppose that that's not even necessarily the most important part of the scene. What really stood out for me was the fact that Jax said this line.
And yet, you're still watching it.
I'm not here for the adventure or anything. I'm just here to hide from the...
I don't know exactly what he was going to say before being cut off, but it seems like he was trying to stay away from something. And while the obvious answer would be the abstraction, he seemed way too calm when it was beating the crap out of the Queen, which makes me believe that there may be something else to be worried about in this world. Now back to Pomy's perspective, we see that she manages to find a old dirty computer that has the same design as the computers from the early 1990s, giving us another possible clue for the time period. What I find interesting here though is that Pomy seems to have a bit of a mental breakdown when she sees the computer setup. It makes me feel like she either recognizes this office space from when she was a human, or that this is the place where she was downloaded into the game world. We also see that this company's logo reads C&A, which stands for Cain and Abel. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Bible story where Cain kills his brother Abel. I think this may imply that there was another AI in this world at some point and Cain killed him in some way or form. Now when Pomy is finally able to make it out of the office space, she is thrust out into the void where she seems to be flying through space. This is where we cut over to Caine, who seems to be in a restaurant with Bubble, and he makes an interesting statement, claiming that Bubbles knows just how to make him say a particular line every time, which implies that they may be in some sort of time loop. And after watching this scene, it reminded me about the scene in the beginning of the episode where this line repeats.
Day after day after day after day after day we fly.
Again, giving the idea that maybe they're in some type of loop. Next, we see that this website pops up that actually takes us to a video that seems to be advertising the Digital Circus gaming experience and the chip that allows it to be possible. Something else that caught my attention here is that the word maze can be heard while listening to the end of the commercial, implying that this game may have a maze-like quality to it and that the only way for the humans to escape is if they can figure out this maze. Back in the episode proper, before Caine teleports to the void to save Pomy, he states that she will get spoiled if she stays out in the void, meaning that she will possibly find some answers that he doesn't want her to have yet. And judging by the look in her eyes, it seems that she has spotted something during her time in the void. With Caine back in the picture, we see that he's able to put everything back to normal with just a snap of his fingers. Except for one thing, and this is what really caught my attention, is the fact that he has to send this abstraction to some type of deep dark pit. And I know a lot of people have been calling this place hell to stick with the religious aspect, but I don't think it really matters what you call it. The vital part here is that once you become an abstraction, not even Caine can save you, which adds a very high level of danger for our humans. This also explains why Caine made the exit door that leads to this office space. I assume that this was supposed to be like a comfort place that the humans could go because it reminds them of their actual life. But since Caine doesn't have enough information or data to actually complete this space, it was only half done, which is why Pomy actually ended up going out into the void. Which again is why I believe that Caine is not the big bad guy here, he's actually just trying to help these humans keep their mental state healthy. Now the episode comes to a close with Caine making a virtual meal for the humans, and this is where Kinger shows that he may be more than he seems. He has a lot of knowledge about this world and specifically the way food works with the virtual characters. And in all honesty, I wouldn't be surprised if Kinger has some big part in creating this world back when he was still a human, which may also explain why he hasn't gone insane with the loss of his queen. Maybe he knows some secret way to bring her back, or at the very least he knows a way to escape this place, because he kind of gives off the vibe that maybe he was like a head developer for this game, which is why he's called Kinger. And I assume that the queen was either like his partner or his real life like wife or something to that degree. Another theory that I think may also be possible is that the queen didn't actually go crazy, which is why Kinger still kind of has his sanity as well. I feel like maybe when one of these abstractions kind of got on the loose, maybe the queen tried to protect the king, which would make sense, and she actually lost her life that way. So maybe when a character has an X on their door, it doesn't always mean that they turn into an abstraction, because as we've seen with Ragatha, an abstraction can definitely take out a character if they give them enough damage. Now, another thing that I thought was interesting about the ending of the episode is that a lot of people have compared this image right here to the Last Supper, which makes sense in a way considering that there is definitely some biblical stuff going on here, but I definitely don't see Pomy as like a Jesus-like character. But maybe as the show develops, more of that will come to light. The episode fully ends with this image of the computer that Pomy saw in the exit space being lit, and my only thought is that this could be the computer that actually transferred the humans into the game space, which is why the screen is on. Maybe it's literally running the game as these characters are going through their life. But for now, these are just some of the theories that I've come up with the information that we have from this episode. Make sure to put your favorite character thus far down in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, check out this video on the screen here, and we'll see you later with another video. Peace, peace.